Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the third generation Apple TV 4K. I did pick up the 128 gigabyte version that has the onboard Ethernet, and we're going to see what this device is all about and whether or not it's a good upgrade from the prior generations. Now, before we get started, I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for this with my own funds. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. No one is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what this new box is all about. Now, the price point on this starts at $129 for the 64 gigabyte version. This 128 gigabyte version is $149. Prior versions of the Apple TV all had Ethernet jacks on the back like this one does, but now only the 128 gigabyte version will have that option. Additionally, if you are looking to use the open Matter standard for home automation, the 128 gigabyte version supports Thread and the 64 gigabyte version does not. So there are some things that you're going to get now with the higher storage option that you didn't get before, so just keep that in mind. I will say that the price point on this, while quite expensive for a TV box, is competitive against the Fire TV Cube and the NVIDIA Shield and perhaps a few other higher-end TV boxes out there. So they are priced in the market, I think, for what this offers. Now, this new Apple TV has Apple's A15 Bionic processor on board. This is the same chip that we saw on the iPhone Pro 13 and a few other devices that came out around the same time. It is a very powerful processor. It is not fully utilized on the TV at the moment. So if you have a current generation or even the first generation Apple TV 4K, there's really no compelling upgrade reason yet with the new one. I use a first generation one on my bedroom TV and have been for a while now. I don't notice any difference in day-to-day performance between using that one and this one. I'm sure there are things we could measure perhaps in seconds or milliseconds, but generally from my experience, I'm not seeing much out of this new box that I can't do on my original one. One thing though that this new box does that the old ones don't is support a high dynamic range mode called HDR10+. And that's something we'll likely encounter more and more as streaming services continue to develop. The reason why that format might become popular is that unlike Dolby Vision HDR, HDR10+ doesn't require streamers to pay a licensing fee. So it's possible you might find content that only works HDR with the HDR10+ mode, and that would be a reason to get one of these things, but I'm not seeing all that much content that's specific to HDR10+ just yet. Now, the Apple TV interface will look very familiar to you if you've ever used an iPhone before, and that's because this product is very much directed to people that are very invested in the Apple ecosystem. So you have your apps here that you can select to load up different things. If you want to move something around, you'll hold down the button here, it'll start jiggling and you can relocate it. You also have the ability to create folders and organize your apps a little bit, very similar to how you might do it on an iPhone. What I really like about the Apple TV interface is that you're not inundated with advertising. What you will see when you first load it up is Apple putting their apps in this top bar, and you will get some promotional stuff in there trying to get you to subscribe to various services. But if you move them out of that bar, you'll see what you want to see. So what I do is I put my Photos app here. So just my iCloud photo library is what I see when I first log into my box every day, and that is a really nice experience versus all the other advertising-based interfaces that we're seeing now on modern devices. And for many people, that might be a reason to get one of these things over another one. I found most of the popular streaming apps are available. We can pop into Netflix here real quick so you can see how quickly everything loads up. It is very, very fast. Again, hard to say if it's that much faster than the old version, but generally I found it to be a very quick experience here to jump into different applications. The remote is similar to the one on the second generation device in that it follows a more traditional design than the first generation, which had this little touchpad thing that a lot of people didn't like. It's got a nice feel to it. It is metal. One thing to note with it, though, is that it has a USB Type-C charging connector now versus the Lightning connector that the old version had. And they don't include a USB-C charging cable in the box, so you may want to pick one of those up if you don't have one already. And that, again, is different than the charger for the iPhones, which is how this remote used to charge. So that's one thing you'll definitely need to pick up, along with an HDMI cable, because they don't include that in the box either. The battery on the remote should last a good long time because it really is just a remote, but you will need to charge it at some point, and of course the interface will inform you as to when that charging needs to happen. What they have integrated into the ClickPad here at the top is a capacitive touch feature to it, so you can push the buttons physically to move around, or you can swipe your finger. I prefer to push the buttons myself as opposed to swiping, so you do have the option here. If you jump into settings and head over to remote and devices, you can just have it work as a click-only pad if you find yourself hitting things too frequently there. The other thing that I recommend you adjust is this button right here, because by default, if you push it, it brings you over to Apple TV's app, and you may not want that. You might want to just go to the home screen here. So if you want to change that, you go over to this option here for TV button and switch that to home screen. And that way, every time you push the button, you're brought right back home. And I noticed if you were a couple of layers into an app, you have to hit the back button a lot on the remote to get back home if you leave that setting on its default. But if you change it, it is one button push and you are back home. Another thing I really like about the Apple TV is how well it integrates with other Apple hardware. So for example, if I take my Airpods out here and stick them in my ear, because these Airpods are synced to my phone, it immediately becomes available here on the Apple TV. So when that message appears and I push the button quick enough, I can automatically connect to the Airpods without having to go through a whole pairing thing, because these are already linked up to my iPhone. And then if I walk away from this and grab my phone and go out for a walk, it'll switch to the iPhone automatically. So there's not a lot of pairing and repairing to do. And they also integrated a nice feature here. By holding down that home button, you'll get this side panel. So if for some reason that detection didn't work properly, or you want to do more of a manual connection, you can jump in and very quickly select the AirPods or another Bluetooth headphone or speaker to send audio to. And of course, it will find other Apple compatible devices in the home, and I can even send audio, for example, from this box to another Apple TV or to my MacBook or to an iPad, and even my home theater receiver here can grab audio over the network. And it also lets you connect a second pair of AirPods simultaneously, so two people can listen privately at the same time. Another neat feature is that if you pull up an app and there's suddenly a keyboard entry, what'll happen is you'll get a notice on your phone and you can just tap on it and start typing, and it comes over pretty quickly. Another thing I really like about this feature is that if you're using a password manager on your phone will automatically suggest the passwords to type into the keyboard entry on the app, because that's been one of the things that always bugs me about using a password manager with TV streaming apps. The typing of the passwords is very difficult with a remote control. So this way I can just grab my password manager's passwords just like I do with those apps on the iPhone, which is another nice integration here. And of course, there's a full remote control built into iOS, so if you swipe down from the right-hand corner of the screen up there and then click on this remote control icon, you will get a remote control that works a lot like the physical one, and you can go ahead and navigate the same way you would on the regular physical remote. Now you can also set it up to work with multiple user profiles, and if you hold down the home button here, you can see that it's making some suggestions for me, because I have an iCloud family sharing account and it knows my kids and my wife from that. And so if I were to go over to, for example, my daughter's iPad, I can get it close to the Apple TV and it will sync her Apple account to this, and her experience will be different than mine when she's logged in with her account. And that, of course, will drive what apps are showing up on screen, the order of those apps, and of course, as a parent, I can restrict what she has access to as well. So everyone can get their own experience on the device when they walk up to it. Now, the Apple TV also supports Siri commands, which you can use your voice for. If you hold down the button here on the side and speak, you can make requests. So for example, I can say, show me Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I can pull up, for example, a universal search for Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, one of the things that's always bothered me about all these different TV boxes is that The universal search is very much hit or miss. So for example, when I did the search for this show, it pops up with a nice landing page here. I can browse through all the different seasons and find something that I might want to watch. And if I go over to an episode here, it'll direct me to Paramount Plus where I can watch it for free, or I can buy an episode from where else, Apple, through the iTunes service. Now, I also get some other options as to where I can watch it. So in addition to Paramount Plus, I can get it on Prime Video. And then, of course, there's another Paramount Plus thing there along with the Apple TV purchase options. Now, what I can also do with the show here is add it to my Up Next list. And this is kind of a to-do list that lives inside of Apple's Apple TV app. And this is a little different than the Apple TV Plus service that is also integrated into this app. And ideally, what it's designed to do is kind of consolidate all of your content from different services into one place. The problem is not all services participate. So while my Star Trek episodes are on here, if I do a search for Stranger Things, I will get a Stranger Things landing page here, but you'll notice I can't add it to Up Next because Netflix doesn't work with Apple TV's app at the moment, and it hasn't worked since they integrated all this stuff together. So I can open it up, but I can't add it to my list, and Apple's not going to track when new episodes get added like they would for other shows that I put into that Up Next screen there. So it's not universal. For the shows that you watch that are in the database, it actually works pretty well, but it's not inclusive of all the content that's out there because not everyone wants to put their stuff inside of Apple's app. And this otherwise works like a full-on Siri device, so I can ask it, what's the weather in New York City tomorrow? And I'll get a very iPhone-like response there. She'll also talk if I have my speakers on. I can also check on the status of my door lock, for example. Is the front door locked? And you can see it was able to communicate with my lock upstairs to see that it was indeed locked. And one of the cool things about the Apple TV is that it doubles as a HomeKit hub for devices that are compatible with HomeKit. And many HomeKit devices, like my door lock upstairs, communicate only over Bluetooth. So if I leave the house, the Apple TV can work with the door lock, and I can lock and unlock the door remotely, even if I'm not close to the lock physically. Now, as far as the general experience is concerned, I found the Apple TV to be among the best players on the market. And my reasons for saying so are a bit technical, which I'll get to in a minute. But in a nutshell, all the major services work fine. You download the app, you get your account logged in, and things just spring up and play properly. It supports Dolby Vision, HDR, HDR10 Plus, like we mentioned before, along with most of the digital audio modes you'll encounter on those major streaming services. A little earlier, I tested it with Disney Plus, HBO Max, and Netflix. All of them were able to go into Dolby Vision or HDR depending on the media. We were able to get Atmos audio working through those services. Everything just kind of worked pretty well. The technical reason why I like the Apple TV so much requires a couple of settings changes to get working, but I think they're important even for novice users to consider. So if we jump into the video and audio settings here and we go over to match content, you'll see that by default it sets this option to off, but we want to turn that on. So let's go inside of that. And you'll notice the first option here is for match dynamic range. And this is important because if you've got a fancy OLED TV that works with Dolby Vision and all this fancy stuff, the Apple TV is going to basically keep the television in that mode all the time, even if the piece of content you're watching doesn't support the mode that the TV has been switched into. So for example, you could have an HDR movie, not a Dolby Vision movie, and your TV will still be in the Dolby Vision mode. Yet the director may have intended for things to look a little differently than how Apple and your TV want to show it to you. So with match dynamic range set to on, your television will switch into the mode that the content is asking for. So if you have a movie that has no high dynamic range, it will switch your TV into standard dynamic range. And if you have a movie that supports Dolby Vision, it'll switch it into that. And so I found this gives you the best experience because the media will determine what mode your TV should switch itself into. The other option here is for matching frame rate. And this one is really important because almost every movie you'll watch is recorded at 24 frames per second. And because a lot of these fancy TV shows on Netflix and Disney Plus and others are recorded like movies, those are also at 24 frames per second. Yet, most TV boxes on the market don't properly switch your television into its 24p playback mode. But the Apple TV actually does a really good job of it. In fact, better than most of the other boxes that I have tested. And that includes a lot of the Android TV boxes and the Fire TVs and a whole bunch of other stuff. And if you set the match frame rate to on, your television will switch into 24p mode when there's 24p content to watch. And things are going to look a lot smoother than they would if your TV is just locked in at its default 60 frames per second. So that's a big one to enable, and I think it will really improve your experience, certainly over other boxes that don't properly do that frame rate matching. So let's move on now to gaming on the Apple TV. And as I mentioned, it's got a pretty powerful processor on board. You're able to pair up Xbox controllers and Sony PlayStation controllers to the Apple TV the same way you can to an iPhone or an iPad. And the gaming experience looks pretty good on here. This is Oceanhorn 2, and I downloaded this through the Apple Arcade subscription plan, but there's also games that you can purchase. Now, the games play great on here as expected, although, as I mentioned at the outset, many developers are not targeting this more powerful A15 chip. So the experience of this game, for example, will probably be about the same, if not identical, on the second generation version and even the first generation 4K Apple TV. But over time, we might see games set to take greater advantage of the power that's available here. But the games that are available look great and play great, and a generally good gaming experience compared to other platforms. Now, there are a couple of ways to get games on this device. If you go into the App Store here and go up to the top of the screen to Arcade, that is where you'll find all the subscription offerings. And all of the games here are downloadable provided you have the active subscription. But you, again, can also buy games. And one thing I always suggest people do is to go over to their purchased screen here, because you may have purchased games on your phone that have an Apple TV version available. So for example, I just went to purchased here and selected not on this TV, and here's all the stuff that I can download to my Apple TV that are on my iTunes account here. So here is the original Oceanhorn that I bought a little while back, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic CD, Jetpack Joyride, a bunch of mobile games essentially, but they are available here on the Apple TV to play in addition to my phone. And again, I don't have to purchase anything that I previously purchased. If I got it on the phone and there's an Apple TV version available, it is downloadable and accessible here. Just note, though, that the Apple TV's library of games is nowhere near what you'll find on the Switch or on the Xbox or PlayStation. And in the case of the Xbox, you get a really good media player paired with a really good gaming experience. And if you are a gamer, I think the Xbox is probably the direction that I would take if you can only afford to buy one device. Now, I can't run my usual benchmarks on the Apple TV because it doesn't support the app that I use for benchmarking, but the app that we do like to look at, which is a 3D Mark Wildlife Test, is available on the iPhone and iPad, which has the same exact processor, so we can get a sense as to how it performs versus other devices on the market. So if you take a look at the chart that I've got up on screen here, you can see that the A15 scored between 8,500 and 10,000 on that test. I found Apple tunes their chips differently depending on the device that it goes into, so my best guess would be somewhere between the iPad mini and the iPhone SE. And either way, that is still significantly more powerful than what you might get out of NVIDIA's Tegra X1, which is in the NVIDIA Shield, which is the most powerful Android TV box on the market. So the Apple TV here does best the Shield when it comes to performance based on the chip that is inside of it. But again, we're not seeing all that much that takes advantage of what this device is capable of. And of course, Apple famously locks down their devices, so getting game emulators on here is rather difficult. They also, oddly, are very restrictive about game streaming. You will find in-home game streaming apps like Moonlight And you'll also see Steam Link down here, so you can stream games from your gaming PC in your home, but you won't find Xbox Cloud Gaming at the moment, nor Amazon Luna or GeForce Now. So all in, if you are heavily invested in the Apple ecosystem, you will be very pleased with the experience you'll get out of the Apple TV. What I like most about it is that you can set it up so you're not inundated with ads every time you turn it on. It integrates well with my iCloud photos and my Airpods and all my other Apple stuff, and it's a very nice experience when I turn this thing on, and I really like how it works. I'm not seeing anything in this new version that my old one doesn't already do, but it's still good nonetheless, and if you are in the market for a new box, this is definitely worth considering. I'm using the Apple TV now quite a bit on my smart TVs because both of my smart TVs are older and not getting the updates that they used to get. So I found the app performance on this is much better. There are apps that my smart TVs don't even get anymore that are on here. And the integration with the Airpods and the ease of use has made this something the family kind of likes over some of the other things that I have hooked up to my televisions. Not great for enthusiasts due to its locked down nature. And as we noted in a video the other day, its Plex performance isn't great. But for general streaming devices for consumers, this is certainly at the top of the heap in my book. That is going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Chris Allegretta, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Logic KGR, Tom Albrecht, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.